Hello everyone, and welcome to Classic Gaming Today, where we take a look at the gaming experiences of the past through the eyes of the present. I'm your host, Tony, and today we're going to look at our very latest Sounds of the Classics episode, this one focused on first-person shooters. We're going to talk about that topic in just a couple minutes, but first, as is usual, just a little bit of housekeeping up front. This is episode number 120. I am excited to be here. I hope all of you are as well. If you'd like to reach out, let me know how I'm doing, provide feedback, comments, suggestions, or just talk about classic games and technology in general. I would love to hear from you, and there are a few ways you can reach out. I have an X account with the handle @ClassicGamingT. I have an email address, which is classicgamingtoday@gmail.com, and we have our Discord server. The link is in the show notes. Discord is the best way to get in touch with me and the rest of the community around this podcast. We have a ton of fun out on Discord. We do weekly and monthly gaming challenges, prizes, rewards, discussions. It's all out there. I highly encourage you all to check it out. I also highly encourage you to check out our Patreon. It is patreon.com/ClassicGamingToday. If you want even more Classic Gaming Today goodness, including a Patreon exclusive bi-weekly podcast expansion pack, patreon.com/ClassicGamingToday is where it's at. I'd also like to give a shout out to our Pantheon patrons. They are ISO, Rich Senewald, David Morton, Sam Twardowski, Sean, Oliver, and Maximus Marshall, Steve Novoselic, Wendell Jr., and Marek. Thank you guys for supporting the show. Thank you all for supporting the show. Whether you contribute monetarily or simply listen on a regular basis, I truly do appreciate all of the support. For anyone who may be new, welcome. This is usually the part of the episode where I go over the anatomy of an episode, where I say that every single episode we look at the history of the game in question, the historical context, how the game was made, why the game was made, before moving into a pseudo-review kind of section where it's not really about assigning numerical values or star counts, but it's really about how it feels to play the game today. We look at the game from several different perspectives, including graphics, sound and music, narrative and or story if the game has one, playability, controls, and overall feel before assigning each game to a category to determine how well the game holds up today, with the top of the top being the Pantheon of Classic Gaming, followed by Golden Oldies, Mediocre Mentions, and then finally Footnotes, which are the games that I have played so you don't have to. But today is not a normal day. Today is another one of our Sounds of the Classics episodes. Around every 10 episodes, we decide to do something a little bit different, which is focus on the music of some classic games. And in particular, we look at the music and the games that mean something to me, or in the case of our last Sounds of the Classics episode, meant something to myself as well as one of our patrons, Wendell. So, this episode is all about first-person shooters. We have around 10-ish or so games that I've selected that really meant something to me as I was growing up and playing all of these classic games. We're going to go through each of those, we'll listen to a song from each one, and then dive into why that song and why that game means something to me. It should be a good time. I always love our Sounds of the Classics episodes because I love video game music. I have loved video game music from the very first time I fired up a video game console. I was hooked. So with that out of the way, we're going to start getting into our topic of the day, which is Sounds of the Classics first-person shooters. Our first game and our first song is Before we talk about Halo, I've got to give a little bit of context around the majority of the entries on this list, or at least I'd say a good chunk of the entries on this list. As I have relayed multiple times before, a number of my video game experiences, especially in the 80s and 90s, revolved around the fact that my brother and I would play games together. And for first-person shooters, that was probably more prevalent than nearly any other genre in gaming. Sure, we'd play adventure games together where one of us would control the character, the other would be kind of the sidekick and help out with puzzles and narration and things like that. We'd do RPGs the same kind of way where we would voice act each of the different characters on the screen and play through the games and the stories. But first-person shooters, probably more so than any other genre of gaming, were the games that we actually played interactively together, whether that was competitively or cooperatively. So there's going to be a lot of stories here that we're going to go through that are all about experiences that my brother and I had together as we played through these games. And as I was thinking for the first song and the first game to kick off our discussion about first-person shooters, I had to go with the original Halo on the Xbox. Let me tell you a little bit about Halo. First of all, I'm going to make an assumption that most people listening probably know what Halo is and most likely have played Halo at some point in their gaming careers. Let me talk to you a little bit about what it felt like to play Halo on a console for the first time. Up until this point, and granted, there were a couple of experiments in how to control first-person shooters effectively on a console-based system. For anybody who may not be aware, the first-person shooter genre effectively got its start on the personal computer, where you had games, and some of the early games in the FPS genre were things like Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, and then eventually Duke Nukem 3D, Quake, Dark Forces, those kind of games. They were all computer-centric games. Anytime that you would play a first-person shooter, especially the early first-person shooters on a computer, typically you were using your keyboard to move around and shoot. Some of those early experiences allowed you to move your mouse to help look around, but not necessarily look in a height-based direction. It was really more two-dimensional plane, so you could look side to side and kind of strafe and do things like that, but you couldn't really look around because mouse look wasn't really a thing. Mouse look did eventually become a thing in the early to mid-90s, but for the earliest first-person shooters, that just wasn't something that was used. Eventually, and this was something that really got popularized around the time that Quake came out, the whole concept of mouse look came into play, where you could actually move around a true three-dimensional space, and you could look around using your mouse, with your mouse effectively controlling where you were looking at on the screen, or effectively aiming on the screen. That was all on the computer, and first-person shooters on the computer evolved fairly rapidly over the course of the 90s into the early 2000s. On consoles, similar kinds of things were happening, but typically speaking, consoles of the time were a little bit less powerful than what you could get on computers, especially in the mid-90s with 3D acceleration rapidly accelerating itself in the computer market. Home consoles couldn't exactly keep pace with some of those technological advancements. And even beyond that, from a control perspective, home consoles were focused on actually handling a controller, not a mouse and keyboard kind of combination. That kind of thing was prevalent, and the fact is that even though there were PC-based gaming pads and joysticks and things like that that offered alternative control schemes for computers, for the most part, the majority of controls that were used in first-person shooters around that time on computers were keyboard and mouse-centric. Not so much on the home console space, where developers, especially as 3D environments, started to become much more prevalent. Developers had to figure out how to translate 3D movement, looking around, aiming, all of the stuff that computers did really well with their mouse and keyboard combo. Developers had to figure out how to translate that into a controller-based experience. And at that time, the concept of dual analog sticks, just as an example, which is kind of the standard today, that didn't even really exist. I mean, sure, on the PlayStation 1, you did eventually get dual analog sticks, but this was not something that was widely used, or at least widely required by games. So I mention all this to say that around the early 2000s, if you were playing a first-person shooter on a console, you were kind of restricted a little bit. You didn't have, except for a few very experimental examples, you didn't really have the concept of a quote unquote mouse look on the home console. It just wasn't a thing. If you needed to aim up or down, or you needed to aim and look around, you were probably stationary, not moving around, holding some button to switch to an aiming like mode, and then you'd look around the screen and shoot what you need to shoot, and then you'd move around a little bit more and find another stationary position. You would stop, aim, point and shoot, whatever, that kind of thing. So when Halo came out, that was the general state of first-person shooters on home consoles. Halo did away with all of that, using the dual analog sticks on the Xbox to create an experience that was as close to a dynamic first-person shooter experience that you would typically get with a mouse and keyboard combination. It was as close as any home console game had ever gotten. And like I said, there had been a couple of experiments over the years, but none of them had really reached a level of popularity that would actually drive this new control scheme across the majority of the video game industry. Halo was the title that became synonymous with first-person shooter console gameplay from the early 2000s on. And when Halo released, it became the standard bearer. Every first-person shooter on consoles, or at least most of them from that point on, would adopt Halo's control scheme, and of course today it is the standard. Halo effectively popularized that control scheme for home consoles for first-person shooters, and the rest, as they say, is history. So absolutely a historically significant game. But that's not just the reason why I picked Halo for our first entry on our list. The fact is, when Halo first came out, my brother and I had been playing games together for years and years and years, and a number of the first-person shooters we're going to talk about we had played together. But most of those first-person shooters up to that point, we played from a competitive perspective. We would go into death matches, and a lot of times we would do just literally one-on-one death matches and just run around empty arenas and try to shoot each other or blow each other up with bombs, and we'll certainly talk about some of those experiences in a little bit. But Halo was a little bit different. Sure, they had the competitive multiplayer aspect there, but the other thing that Halo had, which I don't remember us really experiencing in many first-person shooters before this, was a cooperative campaign. Let me tell you about how awesome it felt to play in person, sitting next to somebody, a cooperative campaign in a first-person shooter the quality of Halo. It was such an amazing experience. And I remember my brother and I sitting together and playing the game for hours, working our way through the campaign, laughing the whole way as we got into all sorts of ridiculous situations, or, which was probably one of the most fun things you could do in the game, piloting one of the Warthogs, the vehicles in the game, and having your co-op partner jump onto the Warthog and man the turret gun on the back of the machine, or the back of the vehicle, rather. Oh my God, it was so much fun because the physics in Halo were really cool too. And if you went over a hill a little bit too fast and you tipped your Warthog, you guys were falling off of the Warthog. It was such a fun game. Oh my God, I had so much fun playing Halo with my brother cooperatively as we worked our way through the campaign, eventually beating it because we were really dedicated to that game. And it was just so much fun. I don't know that there is another experience in first-person shooter gameplay, at least up to that point, that gave us that degree of cooperative gameplay and just the overall feeling of being on a team. Like we were a team of ultra powerful military people, and we just wrecked the alien menace. And we did it together. And Halo, more so than any first-person shooter, at least on consoles up to that point, really made it feel like you weren't fighting the controls in order to do something. You were just playing the game. It was something where you were in it. You were immersed. You were engaged. It was such an amazing feeling to play. And of course, playing it beside my brother and enjoying all of the silly moments that come along with a cooperative kind of experience like that, where we'd cover each other and sometimes one of us would run off onto the side of the screen and another person would have to follow, and we'd all get into firefights and we'd have to try to save each other and everything. Oh, it was phenomenal. Halo is always going to be something that remains in a permanent spot of my long-term memory, if not just because of the historical significance, but because of just how much fun it was playing through that cooperative campaign, getting all silly and just doing whatever the heck we wanted, driving off of cliffs with the War Dog. Oh my, wow. I kind of want to play it again right now, just reminiscing about it. Halo, our first entry in our list of first-person shooters. We're going to go on to our second entry on the list. It is when the original Quake came out on PC, I didn't have a machine that was quite powerful enough to play it at its fullest capabilities. Quake, when it first came out, was not a 3D accelerated title. It was certainly a 3D title, but most of the rendering was reliant on your actual central processing unit, or CPU, to generate the visuals. The actual 3D accelerated portion of Quake didn't come till a little bit later, when there was a patch release that added 3DFX 3D acceleration to the game, and then from that point on, it was just like, wow, 3D acceleration is going to be something really special, and then it really just took off from that point, and 3D acceleration became a thing across the majority of the video and computer game landscape. But when Quake originally came out, I did not have a 3D accelerator. I'm trying to remember what video card I had back then. I don't think I still had the S3 Verge, because the computer I've talked to you guys about a bunch before was a 486SX 25 megahertz Tandy machine with 4 megabytes of RAM, around 40 to 80 megabytes worth of hard drive space, and an S3 Verge pseudo 3D accelerator card. I mean, it was, I guess it could generate 3D stuff, but it was not a great 3D accelerator. It certainly wasn't a 3DFX 3D accelerator. And as I was playing Quake, I believe at this point I had upgraded my machine. And I want to say maybe I had a Pentium. My machine after the 486SX25 was a Pentium 200 megahertz MMX, which I loved, by the way. I loved the fact that I could get an MMX CPU, even though at the time I didn't really know what the heck MMX meant, other than the fact that it was extra stuff on top of a traditional 200 megahertz CPU, and coming from a 486SX 25 megahertz to a 200 megahertz Pentium MMX CPU was like going from a Pinto to a Ferrari in terms of cars. It was just ridiculous. So as I was playing Quake, though, when I played Quake, I don't remember which machine I originally played Quake on. I want to say it had to be the Pentium, because I can't imagine the 486 25 megahertz running Quake at all. It would probably explode. So I must have had the Pentium machine, but I don't think I had a 3D accelerator even when the patch came out. So Quake I experienced with software rendering. However, when Quake 2 came out, which is where the song was from that we just played. When Quake 2 came out, that I did have a 3D accelerator for. And let me tell you, this was the game. Quake 2 was the game that sold me on 3D acceleration. I had never, at least on my own personal machine, I had seen screenshots of what 3D accelerators could do. But on my own personal computer, I had never seen what a true 3D accelerated game could feel like or look like. I was used to the pixelated graphics of games like Quake without 3D acceleration, of Duke Nukem 3D, all of the prior kinds of first-person shooters and other games. I was used to those kind of visuals. When I fired up Quake 2 and I saw the 3DFX logo appear on the screen and I actually started playing the game, I found it was such a smooth, ridiculously good-looking experience. The smoothness, by the way, was the biggest thing for me back around this time. When I started to play Quake 2, and I saw that all of the textures were smooth. There were no pixels in sight. I mean, it wasn't necessarily the highest quality textures. People were still trying to figure out how to get the most performance out of computers around this time, and 3D visuals from around the time Quake 2 came out in the mid-ish 90s, it still wasn't something that I would consider ultra high definition. Certainly not ultra high definition, especially if you look back and seeing how 3D graphics have evolved from that point to where we are today. But coming from the perspective of pure pixels into a smooth, texture-filled environment, and not just smooth in terms of the visuals, but the actual movement in the game. Playing Quake 2 with a 3D accelerator felt like an entirely different experience. There were no hitches. There were no hiccups to gameplay. You moved around and everything was silky smooth. And I still remember playing through Quake 2 and thinking to myself, this is phenomenal. I have never experienced anything like this. The smoothness of the gameplay, the smoothness of the visuals, the frame rate that was rock solid. I was beside myself. Quake 2 was probably, I think, the first game that I ever really played with 3D acceleration. And because of that, I will always remember it. It was the game that taught me what the potential was around 3D accelerators and the future of graphics technology in computer and video games. It was the game that introduced me to a brand new world filled with amazing possibilities, and I, from that point on, recognized that technology was a really awesome thing and something that I wanted to continue to stay at the forefront of. I never wanted to have an experience from that point on where I was playing something in a subpar kind of way, because the thought was, well, I want to be able to experience all of these new things when they come out, when they're actually new. So this actually started me down a path of wanting to be almost at the not quite bleeding edge, but certainly at the leading edge of technology, especially when it came to video and computer games, because the experience I had playing Quake 2 was something that will always stay with me. And like I said, it influenced my entire tech-centric focus of my life from that point on. Seeing something look so good, not just in a magazine, but on my computer monitor, was a transformative experience and something that I will always remember. We're going to move on to our next song. Let's see if anybody can guess what this one is from. back when my brother and I were playing first-person shooters in the 90s into the early 2000s, any multiplayer that we would typically do was in-person local, either co-op or competitive multiplayer, meaning the people we were playing with were ourselves. We would play against each other, we would play cooperatively with each other, but we didn't really get into the online scene in terms of first-person shooter games. We did get into MMORPGs with EverQuest, which sucked away years of our life in a good way, because EverQuest was phenomenal. If anybody wants to hear about my thoughts around EverQuest, and my brother's actually, since he sponsored the episode, go back around a year-ish. We have an episode focused solely on EverQuest and specifically a nostalgia trip kind of experience back into what EverQuest was to me and my brother, of course, because like I said, he sponsored the episode. So we got into the multiplayer aspect of MMORPGs, but we never really got into the multiplayer aspect of first-person shooters. Certainly not multiplayer outside of just the two of us messing around in a game. Well, that all started to change with the original Call of Duty. This is the game. Call of Duty is the game that effectively introduced us into the whole online first-person shooter competitive community. That certainly existed before Call of Duty came out. But for us, we didn't really dive into that gameplay or that game world until Call of Duty. And I'm talking literally about the very first Call of Duty game. This is not part of the Modern Warfare kind of series of titles or the Black Ops or anything like that that's become pervasive and insanely popular over the last, over a decade at this point. We're talking World War II era Call of Duty. When my brother and I started playing multiplayer in Call of Duty, we were not good. Or at least I'll say, I won't assign that to him. I was not good. I was not really good. I didn't know what I needed to do to actually survive a multiplayer match. My brother, on the other hand, he had a little bit of a different perspective. Just to give you all a little bit of sense in terms of our personality. I'm the kind of guy that sort of charges into battle. I usually like to play different classes that allow me to just leap right in to the fore, especially in first-person shooters. My thought is I want to be running around the battlefield, shooting people left and right. I want to be in the center of the action. My brother is a little bit different, at least from a first-person shooter perspective. He always enjoyed playing snipers. He always enjoyed kind of sitting in the sniper nest and watching for different enemies to appear on the horizon where he would just plink them off, and then he would end up defeating them without them even knowing where the heck he was. So when we started playing Call of Duty, those were the two styles of gameplay that we tried to marry together. Me with being a little bit more focused on the direct in-your-face action, him much more so focused on sniping from across the battlefield where people couldn't even know where the shots were coming from. At the time that we played Call of Duty, every time, at least it felt like every time, one of the multiplayer matches would end, there would be a specific song that would play. And that song is Red Square, which is the song that we just played before we started talking about Call of Duty for this discussion. And back then, that song in particular stuck in my head. And I thought, wow, what a ridiculously good song. What a moving piece of music. It was one of those songs that immediately, as soon as you hear it, it just gets etched into your permanent memory. And from that point on, I have always associated multiplayer gaming with that song. Fast forward 20-ish years, and as I was preparing for this episode, I thought to myself, I need to find this song. I need to find the song that is associated with this experience in my gaming career. And you know what? I couldn't find the darn song. I thought that it was from Call of Duty. So I started to go through literally all of the Call of Duty games, songs, whatever, and I tried to search for songs that played after a multiplayer match ended, but invariably, I couldn't find the song, and I started thinking to myself, maybe it wasn't Call of Duty, maybe it was Medal of Honor, which was another game that we did play around the same time, once again, competitively online. So I started thinking to myself, is my memory foggy? Like, is something going on here? And then one day, not even necessarily preparing for this episode, I was watching something on YouTube, and then I heard the very familiar sound of the song. It started up like, La da 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 da. And I literally paused. I paused in my motion and I thought, wait a second, that's the song. That's the song. That is the song I've been looking for. And then I was able to find out that it was in fact Red Square. And then I went out there, I found the song and I listened to it on repeat for a good maybe 15, 20 minutes because it is just such a ridiculously good song. Beyond being a good song though, it brought back such a flood of memories of playing Call of Duty with my brother competitively online. I wasn't all that great back then. I did become better, by the way, and I got pretty heavy into Call of Duty for, I want to say maybe from around 2016-ish to maybe 2019-ish. I got really into Call of Duty, so much so that I actually became competitively, I guess, what is the right word? Competitively valid. I was valid in competition. I actually was able to perform okay, but I haven't played Call of Duty in years at this point. I kind of want to get back into it with the new Black Ops. I hear some good things about it. But anyway, that's a discussion for another day. Call of Duty, definitely one of those games that I'll always remember simply because the multiplayer that my brother and I experienced was phenomenal. It was such a fun time, but also because Red Square as a song is just so good. And I can't even imagine a world where I don't know that song. It's that good. It is just synonymous to me with that era of first-person shooter gaming, and I will always, always, always love it. We're going to move on to our next song. That one is from... It goes without saying that in the world of first-person shooters, Half-Life is probably one of the most influential games ever released. And even beyond the world of first-person shooters, Half-Life is probably just one of the most influential games ever released. Before Half-Life, the concept of a true, in-depth, in-world narrative in a first-person shooter wasn't really a thing. Sure, you had some games that had narrative structure around the different missions that you would go on, but you never had an experience that felt like you were truly exploring an open world with a real plot and storyline that you would actually be able to progress through, at least until Half-Life came out. When Half-Life came out, it was something that gripped me almost like no other first-person shooter, probably unlike any other first-person shooter up to that point. When I started the game, and I didn't know a whole lot about Half-Life when I first played the game when it came out. I did get it right around the time it released, and I had heard, based on magazine reviews, that this was like the game. This was the game to play. So I was pretty pumped to start playing the game, but I didn't know what to expect, really. I was kind of thinking, okay, well, maybe it's just an evolution of the first-person shooter stuff that I'm used to. Probably going to be a fairly good game with some good controls. There's a storyline in there. Okay, great, whatever. So I sat down, I started playing the game. And the very opening moments of the game, you don't really explore the environment directly. I mean, you do because you're on a tram car that's effectively bringing you in to the Black Mesa facility. And I'm on this tram car, and I start to think to myself, wait a second. It's bringing me into like a real world here. I know it wasn't real, but it's bringing me into an environment. And immediately I thought to myself, this almost feels like a Disney World attraction. Because one of the things that I love about Disney World and amusement parks like that, like the ones that are themed, the ones that actually have in-depth attractions, not just ones that have roller coasters and merry-go-rounds and things like that. I like those amusement parks for what they are, but I really enjoy the immersive theme parks like you get with Disney World or Universal Studios. Those kinds of experiences where you get engaged and immersed in a world where even if you're standing in the line for an attraction, there's something happening in that line. There is story that's playing. There are characters interacting with you. There are different things you could look at on the walls or on the monitors or whatever. It feels like you're walking into a brand new world. Once you enter the line queue in Disney World in any of their rides, or at least the majority of their rides, you get transported into the world of that ride. That is what I really love about theme parks. And Half-Life, when I first started playing it kind of felt like a theme park attraction. Here I am on this moving tram car thing, and I'm getting transported into a world, and I'm looking around and I'm seeing all sorts of weird things. I'm seeing robotic kinds of creatures. I'm seeing different science happening, and I'm kind of thinking to myself, what is this? Am I really getting transported into this brand new environment, this brand new world? And then I started to actually control the game, and I realized that you don't start the game with a gun, you start the game with a lab coat. and you kind of walk around and you're talking to characters in this ostensibly first-person shooter. You're not doing much shooting at all. Of course, it doesn't take long before bad things happen, and you do get exposed to some of the in-game weaponry like your trusty crowbar and eventually a variety of weaponry. But those opening moments of Half-Life, the opening, what would it be, like 30 minutes to an hour of Half-Life? Probably one of the most memorable stretches of a game ever, from my perspective. It was so unlike anything else that I had played up to that point. It was so different. It was so unique. It felt so immersive. I don't think I've ever been as immersed in the opening of any game since Half-Life. Half-Life might be the one that immersed me the most back then. And I'm thinking now, I'm trying to think. I mean, there's certainly immersive experiences, but I don't know if there's anything that I would call out as memorable as an immersive experience as what Half-Life was. The rest of Half-Life is great too, by the way. It's not like it's just the opening that's good and then the rest of the game falls off. Nope. Half-Life remains an amazing experience from beginning to end. Although, I mean, the alien world at the end of the game, maybe. I mean, that's definitely the low point for me, or at least in the original game. From what I understand, the remake, kind of a remake. It's like a fan-made, but Valve accepted remake, and I can't remember exactly what it's called off the top of my head right now. Supposedly improved upon the alien world a bit. But the original Alien World, take it or leave it, it wasn't the best part of the game for me, at least. The best part of the game is probably the opening, but the rest of the game was great too. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent right now. Half-Life was an amazing experience. The beginning of that game was probably, like I said, one of the most memorable experiences in all of first-person shooter gameplay, because it was so unlike what I was used to from a first-person shooter game. This was a game that wasn't afraid to slow things down and present you a world and a narrative that you could actually experience and become immersed in. And for that, I will forever remember Half-Life. We're going to move on to the next game on the list. It is That song is from Terminator Skynet, one of the earlier games to use mouse look as a way of actually navigating within a first-person shooter game. Let me tell you a little bit about Terminator Skynet, and I'm going to be honest and just be right up front with this. Skynet is probably the game on this list that I have played the least. I may have played Skynet for 15 minutes in my entire gaming career. So you might be wondering, why the heck would you be picking a song from a game where you only spent 15 minutes playing? How could you have an indelible memory about a game that you simply played for 15 minutes? Was the game just that darn good? Was the game that phenomenal that those 15 minutes, even though you never went back to it again, those 15 minutes remained a permanent spot in your memory? What gives? I can hear people asking me that. What gives? What are you talking about? Well, no. It's not that Skynet was a phenomenal game. I didn't play it enough to be able to make that assertion one way or the other. The thing with Skynet, and let's talk about the experience of buying Skynet, coming home, and playing Skynet, but not just as a solo kind of person. I'm going to give you a very real, personal insight into what it felt like to buy Skynet and play Skynet with, you may have guessed, my brother. For those who may not be aware, Terminator Skynet, when it first came out, had probably one of the more distinct looking boxes in computer games. You walk into, and I'm going to try to paint the picture. We walked into Electronics Boutique at the local mall, and we're walking around, and we go into the PC game section, which at this point still had tons of big boxes on the shelf. This was like the mid 90s or so. I want to say maybe 94-ish or so, 94, 95, somewhere around there. We walk into Electronics Boutique and we look at the shelves and we're looking at the big box PC games, which at that point were just known as PC games because there wasn't a concept of a big box versus a little box. But anyway, we're looking at the boxes and one strikes us, literally shines a light in our eye. And I'm like, what's going on there? Well, the fact is that was Terminator Skynet. The box itself was so shiny and had almost like this embossed visual on the front of the box that had the right kind of texturing and coloring. And I don't know exactly what it was, but basically it was reflective. It was like super glossy embossed. And when you looked at it, it literally allowed it to shine. And because of the way the Terminator looked on the front of the box and the way the overall box visuals looked, it was immediately striking. And we thought to ourselves, whoa, first of all, the box looks awesome. This is a Terminator game, a Terminator first-person shooter. We could walk around and we could shoot Terminators. This sounds like an amazing experience. So at that point, my brother decided to buy it. And back then, just to give you a little bit more insight into our dynamic, we would both play any games that we would get. But there were certain times where I would buy a game and I would declare it to be mine. Or he would buy a game and he would declare it to be his. Now we're talking mid 90s. So I was probably at this point 13, 14 years old. He's a little bit younger than I am. So he was probably like 10, 11 years old, somewhere around there. So we're not old. We don't have a ton of disposable income. We just have whatever we were able to save or gifts that we might have gotten from family, whatever. But there were certain games that I would buy and I would say, this is my game. And of course he could play it, and same kind of thing. He would buy games and of course I could play those games. Terminator Skynet was one of the games that he decided was going to be his game. So he purchased the game and we were super excited to come home and play Skynet. So we got home, we installed the game on our computer. He sat down to start playing it and I'm starting to watch him. I'm watching him to see what his reaction is. And he almost immediately is getting super frustrated, super upset, thinking that the game is awful. And I'm looking at him like, what's wrong, bro? What's going on? And the thing was that the game used mouse look, which at that time was not something that we were used to using. We had not really used mouse look ever before. We were always on the keyboard for doing first-person shooters. And he looked at it and he said, I can't control this. I can't play this game. The mouse, why would I use the mouse to look around? That's stupid. I said, well, bro, why don't you try it? Give it a shot. And I sat down and I tried to play it a little bit and I'm like, now this feels really unnatural to me. I don't understand how to control it either. But I usually, maybe because I was a little bit older, I was a little bit more patient than what he was. So even though I didn't have the best experience playing the game right out of the gate, I thought to myself, I can adapt. I'll come around to this. This is probably going to be a great game anyway, so it'll just take some time to get used to. And he turned to me and he said, no, I want to return it. And I said, but bro, we only spent like 10, 15 minutes playing the game. You want to return it? And he said, yes, I want to return it. And he was getting mad. He was mad at the game. He was like, no, I'm not going to spend my money on something that is this sucky. I'm like, you didn't even try. Can I try it a little bit? Nope. I want to return it. I love you, bro. But yes, this is an experience, and I'm curious. So this is a direct message out to Sam, my brother. Do you remember this? Do you remember this as fondly, so to speak, as I do? Because I remember it. It has scarred me for the last almost 30 years. I will eventually go back to play Skynet, by the way, because this feels like unfinished business to me. But he was adamant. He said, I want to return this. And it was his game. He had bought it. So what am I going to do? I can't really say, no, let me keep playing the game that you spent your money on. So we went back to Electronics Boutique and we returned it. This was back around the time where you actually could return computer games. You could actually go in there and say, and Electronics Boutique was really cool. I don't know if anybody else has much experience with Electronics Boutique. It kind of merged over time with Software Etc. and Babbage's and all those kind of things to become what is now, I guess, GameSpot, or GameStop, rather, not GameSpot. GameSpot's an online magazine. GameStop, which I know different people have different opinions about GameStop, but its predecessor companies, especially Electronics Boutique and Software Etc., which were the two that we would frequent, were really cool back in the 90s. And especially if you were a frequent customer, you could go in there and you could just literally go back to the store and just be like, hey man, I didn't like this. And they'd be like, I'm sorry, let me take it and give you all your money back. And it didn't matter if it was opened or played or whatever. They would just give you the money back. Now, of course, I never abused that, but this was one of those times where my brother wanted to return the game. We went to Electronics Boutique. We did return the game. We got our money back, or he got his money back, and he spent it on something else. I don't remember what he spent it on after that, but it was definitely something that he liked better than Skynet. And the reason he didn't like it was because of Mouselook. Who would have known back then that in later years, Mouselook would become the standard for first-person shooters? And I'm not sure how Skynet does its implementation. That's why I have to go back and play it, because it's possible that the Skynet controls really aren't all that great as an early Mouselook game, but I am super curious, and it does feel like something I need to go back and resolve at some point, because it's just sitting out there as one of those things that I haven't been able to resolve. I need to figure out if Skynet really is as bad as my brother believed, or if it's something a little bit better than what he had originally just thought. I don't know. If anybody has played Skynet, let me know. Let me know if it's worth my time or not, but I definitely have to try it. I mean, regardless, I have to try it because it's one of those things that just remains out there as something I will always be curious about. But that's why I picked this track for inclusion in our episode, not because of all of the fond memories I have of playing the game, but because of the memories I have surrounding the acquisition and eventual return of the game. We're going to move on to our next entry on the list. Let's see if anybody can guess what this song is from. I've relayed this story before, but before the original Doom, I was not much of a PC gamer. I was primarily a console and arcade kind of guy. From a console perspective, I was almost exclusively Nintendo around that time. But when we did get our first multimedia PC, the one I keep talking about, the 486 SX25 MHz Tandy machine from Radio Shack, which we bought for $999 one day, once we got that machine, that opened up an entirely new world of potential games that I could play. And the night that my father came home from work and he brought me the shareware copy of Doom and said, "Hey, this looks like it might be something fun. Do you want to try it?" And I said, "Of course." And I put it in the machine. The moment I tried Doom for the first time, I was hooked, and I was from that point on going to become a computer gamer. So that's exactly what happened. Doom was my gateway into PC gaming. Around the time that Doom came out, one of the big things that were prevalent around the whole Doom ecosystem was the concept of mods, the concept of new maps, the concept of changing Doom to be something that is not quite Doom. And I remember looking around and seeing all of these different modifications and thinking, wow, these things are really, really cool. And around this time too, one of the other things that I used to do with my father and brother is go to computer shows. For anybody who hasn't had the pleasure of going to a computer show in the mid-90s or even the early 90s, let me just go through what the experience is. You walk into this large convention hall, this convention center kind of experience, and you see literally across the entire floor a bunch of wooden tables set up with a ton of different vendors trying to sell you computer hardware, software, pirated software oftentimes, adult software many of the time, and trying to just sell you on their products. A lot of times when you go to a computer show, you can get things a lot cheaper than at retail because a lot of these items were already opened for whatever reason. A lot of the software, probably more so than what I recognized at the time, was most likely bootleg, or you could just buy the CD outside of the box. Back then, you could literally go there and I never questioned why you'd be able to get a bunch of games on Jewel Case for significantly cheaper than what you would if you actually bought the box at retail. But I bought a ton of software around then. And when I was going around the computer show one day, this was after obviously I had gotten indoctrinated into PC gaming by playing Doom. As I was walking around the computer show one day, I found a selection of floppy disks. And in that floppy disk selection were a ton of different mods, WADs, and maps for Doom. And I started flipping through it and I found a couple that really caught my eye. One was Alien. So based on the movie Alien. And I thought, oh, I got to play that. So I picked that disc up. And then the other one that I really wanted to play was Star Wars. I thought, wow, I could play Star Wars as a first-person shooter kind of experience. I don't know if I actually used the phrase first-person shooter because that wasn't really ubiquitous at this point. But I must have thought to myself, boy, I could play Star Wars in a Doom-styled game? Yes, I want to do that. So I picked up Star Wars, the unofficial modification for Doom. I got home, I went to install Star Wars, and what I realized quickly was that you couldn't always do that with the shareware version of Doom. Yes, I was still trying to run mods and WADs off of the shareware version of Doom, which sometimes would work, but most of the time did not. And I don't believe it was officially supported, actually, by id Software to run mods on the shareware copy. You had to have the full retail copy or mail-in copy of the game, which at that point, when I had picked up the Star Wars mod, I didn't have. So I had these two discs. I had Alien and Star Wars, but I had no way to really play it because I didn't have the full version of Doom. Now, some of you might say, well, just go get the full version of Doom. But for whatever reason, I didn't do that. I was doing something else, or maybe I was playing other games at the time, and I just thought, oh, well, I'll put these discs off to the side, and someday I'll go back to them. Well, a little bit later, there was a brand new game that was released, and it was called Dark Forces. This was Star Wars kind of in a Doom environment. It was basically Doom Star Wars. But rather than being an unofficial mod, this was an official release by LucasArts. And I thought to myself, wow, this is a real Star Wars Doom game. I have got to get this one. And you look at the front of the box and you see the stormtroopers staring you down and you think to yourself, I'm about to become a Star Wars legend. I'm about to become part of the Star Wars universe. I bought the game, I brought it home, I installed it, and immediately I was whisked away to a galaxy far, far away. Dark Forces, more so than any other first-person shooter up to that point, immersed me in the game. We talked earlier about Half-Life and how that was one of the first first-person shooters to actually have a narrative included that brought everything together into a cohesive, interactive, integrated world. Well, Dark Forces had a narrative too. The thing is that Dark Forces was split up into multiple missions, and you would get your narrative in between missions and some cutscenes in between missions and that kind of stuff, but it wasn't the same kind of breadth and scope as what Half-Life would eventually implement. But for the time, when you're comparing Dark Forces to Doom, which literally the story there is walk into hell and shoot stuff, Dark Forces was a revelation. And the fact that it was in the Star Wars universe, and not just in kind of like a pseudo representation of Star Wars. You were in the Star Wars universe. The weapons that you would have in the movie were in the game. The sound effects were in the game. The music was in the game. The different characters, the different costumes, the different sets and environments. Everything in the movies was in the game. It felt like playing a true Star Wars interactive experience, and I lost myself in Dark Forces for an extended period of time. I didn't actually beat Dark Forces back then. That wouldn't come until, I guess at this point, 3.5 years ago, I think it was, when I finally sat down to play Dark Forces and complete it in full. And this was right around the time where I was getting back into the whole retro physical hardware side of computer collecting. So it was right around the start of 2020 when I was looking for more hobbies to do now that I was home literally all the time. And I was starting to pick up some older machines, and I thought to myself, well, what would be a great game to play on a 486 DX4 100 megahertz, which was one of the machines that I ended up purchasing around this time. And I thought to myself, Dark Forces. I never beat it. I never played it, really. I mean, I never beat it to a degree back in the day. I played it enough, but I never got to the end of the game. So I installed Dark Forces off of physical media onto that truly vintage machine, and I played through Dark Forces from beginning to end, loving every second of it. Dark Forces presented a different kind of first-person shooter experience than what I was used to around that time. Up to that point, it was all Doom. After, I recognized that there could be other experiences in the first-person shooter genre, and ones that could be deeply immersive, engaging, and above all, fun. Moving past Dark Forces, we're going to go to the next game on the list. It is how could a discussion about first-person shooters ever be complete without talking about GoldenEye? Above every other first-person shooter, probably in history, other than Call of Duty, and I'm talking about the modern Call of Duties, GoldenEye probably represents the most time that I've ever spent playing a first-person shooter because it was just so fun back then when it first came out. This is another one where a lot of the fun comes from playing multiplayer with my brother because GoldenEye multiplayer is something else. We're going to talk about that in a second. But GoldenEye, just as a base game, being able to play the storyline of GoldenEye, which at the time was a really popular James Bond film. It was the return of James Bond with Pierce Brosnan in the lead role after not having a James Bond for, I don't know how many years it was at that point, but I remember there being a ton of fanfare around Pierce Brosnan being announced as James Bond. And GoldenEye, when I went to see it in the movie theater, wow. That one, I was hooked from beginning to end. From the very beginning when he does his bungee leap jump thing off of the, I guess, what was it? Was it a dam? I think, yeah, off a dam. And the whole thing and the fact that he was battling 006, first of all, I love when you have similarly skilled combatants going against each other. So 007 versus 006, oh, sign me up. It's the same reason why, if you ever watch the old series Knight Rider, my favorite episode of that is when Kit, who is the robotic car, or the, I guess, autonomous car in Knight Rider, is facing off against its alter ego, which I can't remember the darn car's name. But I love when there's like the equally skilled combatants, or kind of the yin and the yang. I love that kind of stuff in narratives and movies and games and everything. So the fact that GoldenEye had two 00 agents facing off against each other, yep, that was amazing from a movie perspective. And then being able to play that experience interactively on my Nintendo 64, yeah, I was there. I played through that game. I played through it a lot. I mean, it wasn't one of those games where I just played once and forgot about it. I played through the actual storyline multiple times because I was just so enamored with the game. But the majority of the gameplay, the majority of the time I spent playing GoldenEye 007 was not in the single player. It was in the multiplayer. And that experience was one of the most fun multiplayer experiences I have ever had in all of gaming. Back then, when you're playing multiplayer on a console, you weren't able to play, for the most part, you weren't able to play on different TVs. It wasn't like there was the ability to network consoles together, though I know that some, even early consoles, allowed that ability to happen. And there were different link cables and things that you could technically play on two different TVs, two different consoles, and have that kind of distributed but still local multiplayer experience. GoldenEye 007 did not allow that. Its multiplayer was based on split-screen gameplay. So when you were playing against each other in GoldenEye, somebody would be on the top of the screen and somebody would be on the bottom of the screen. Or if you had four people playing, it would be four boxes on the screen. And ostensibly, you should only focus on your box of the screen, because if you look at the other person's box, that could be considered cheating. So my brother and I, we played everything together back around that time. And GoldenEye was one of those games that we played a ridiculous amount of. We played so much multiplayer. Our personal favorite, and I know that everybody has different favorites for GoldenEye because there are so many different varieties of gameplay and different modifiers that you can set up with your multiplayer game, but our favorite was picking either the bunker or the archives as the map, picking proximity mines, and giving ourselves each around a minute at the beginning of each map to place our proximity mines wherever we wanted. And then we would go off and we would start competing against each other with the hopes that one of us would wander into an area where a proximity mine was already set up. And oftentimes we placed the proximity mines in such a way that would create a chain reaction of explosions, so that if you got hit by one, you were pretty much going to bring the house down because it was going to create this chain reaction of destruction that was literally going to make the entire game chug to a crawl, and the frame rate would go down because the N64 was trying to render so many explosions on the screen at one time, and it just couldn't because it was a ridiculous number of explosions. So it was just something that was so much fun. The other favorite that we had was using the Golden Gun, which the Golden Gun allowed for single shot kills. So if you picked up the golden gun and you shot somebody with it one time, they would die. They basically, it ate up all of their hit points immediately, and it made you ultra powerful if you could get off that single shot. Of course, it was a single shot gun. It wasn't an automatic, so you had to be fairly accurate with your shots, but that was another one of our favorites. The top one, though, by far, was the proximity mines. And I remember so fondly playing this game constantly. I remember how many times my brother and I would accuse each other of cheating by looking at the opposing player's portion of the split screen. And I'd say, bro, you couldn't possibly know that I put a proximity mine there unless you looked at my screen. And he said, well, you wouldn't know that I had my proximity mine there unless you looked at my screen. And that went back and forth for a good 15 minutes. You know the way brotherly love is. It's kind of equal parts care and loathing, but it was a lot of fun. We had so much fun playing that game, and I will forever cherish those memories. I don't think there's another collection of memories associated with gaming that I can possibly, I'm trying to think real time. I think GoldenEye might be one of my fondest memories in all of gaming. Playing GoldenEye with my brother might literally be one of the fondest memories I have in gaming history because it was so much fun. We had so much fun playing that one. And I am so scared to go back to GoldenEye today because I know that the controls for GoldenEye are not modern. I know that we were talking earlier about Halo and how that modernized and popularized the concept of first-person shooter gameplay on a console. Well, I know in GoldenEye, it's not modern. You're not going to be mouse looking, so to speak, around the game. You're going to have to be stationary and aiming and all that kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, I want to play it. And I know that they've had remakes and sort of remasters out there that I'm assuming improve or more modernize the gameplay, but I kind of want to go back and play the original. I'm curious. I'm curious how well it holds up, but I'm also scared to see how well or how not well it holds up, because this is one of those games that I have such fond memories around that I would feel so deflated if I went back and I realized that, at least from a modern perspective, it's not as good as what I remember it. I think I'm going to leave this one to my memory because it's one of those things where I cherish that memory so much that I don't want there to be any possibility of it being decreased or impacted. I want to keep that memory on a pedestal and never have it be tarnished because, like I said, it is one of my fondest memories in all of gaming, and I know I will remember it forever. We're getting on a little bit long at this point, and I have so many songs and games I could keep discussing that this may have to become a volume 2 kind of thing. But I do want to play one more song from one more game, and I'm picking it for a very specific reason. We're going to talk about that in a second. Let's see if anybody knows what game this song is from.
Baby's liquored up and she's talking to my friends about this, that, and nothing. Then she starts it all again. Head like a powder keg with hair that's on fire. She's looking for a sucker, or she found another buyer. Steak breath, sudden death, sitting on the bar, grabbing every butt she sees, no matter who you are. Yelling at the cops, now she's going too far. She just blew her lunch in my new car. My baby's all liquored up. Lord, how'd she get so liquored up? She smiles like a reptile and her lips are razor thin. Her legs are made of jello, but her voice can rip your skin. To hide her potty mouth, she hikes her skirt above her head. The whole 7th Fleet is checking out her spread. Foul gas, shot glass stuck to her snout. In everybody's business, don't care what it's about. Rum, gin, anything, now it's getting stout. The whole club's praying that she finally passes out. My baby's so liquored up. She said she'd be the designated driver. Look out, here she goes. Normally a very nice girl, but how liquor Well, I'm out of here.
Most of the games we talk about for our Sounds of the Classics episodes are games that mean something to me. They have some sort of memory associated with them that is deeply personal, or it brings me back to a period of nostalgia, or it makes me remember what it felt like to be a younger person playing games with my brother or friends or other family or whatever. Most of the songs and games that we've talked through have deeply personal meanings to me. Redneck Rampage does not fit that bill. It just does not. I am not going to stand here and say Redneck Rampage brings me back to a time when I was walking around. I don't even know. I can't even make it up. I mean, Redneck Rampage is, I don't remember it being a great game. It might be good. I don't know. I need to go back and play it. I actually want to go back and play Redneck Rampage because this is one of those games that seemed, even when I was younger, seemed absolutely ludicrous to me that they would even greenlight this kind of game because it was so over the top, semi-offensive. And I just thought to myself, what is this game? What is it? And the game itself, honestly, not terribly memorable to me. I remember the box art and the gross, I guess, I'll use the term redneck just because it's used in the game title itself, but the gross portrayal of these people that the game categorizes as rednecks on the front of the box. And I just thought to myself, this looks grotesque. I gotta play it. I did play it a bit. I didn't play it a ton, but I played it a bit, but I don't remember the game being anything revolutionary. But the soundtrack was actually pretty darn interesting to me. And I'm not typically the kind of person that listens to, I don't even know what style of music this would be called. Is it like rockabilly? Is that what it's called? I'm not sure what genre of music it'd be called, but I'm not typically into like the rockabilly kind of music, if that's what this genre of song is. But for whatever reason, this particular song, which I believe is called All Liquored Up, which chef's kiss on the title. That particular song, for whatever reason, I absolutely love. I don't know why. I don't know why I really like that song. It is so absurd. And you listen to the lyrics and everything. It's ridiculous. But there's something about it to me. I don't know. There is something. This has stuck with me from the moment that I heard it in game. And from that moment, I wanted to listen to it out of game. And for whatever reason, when I listen to this song, I don't necessarily think about Redneck Rampage, but it almost creates a different picture in my head. It almost creates a scene. And I think a lot of you know this. I have a fairly vivid imagination. And when I think about certain things, I kind of transport myself into different scenes and see how whether a piece of music or a type of scenario would play out. And I think about it almost from like a movie perspective. Like if I were making a movie, what action would I attach to this particular song? And from the very moment I first heard this song, I always had one picture in my head. Picture this one. It's kind of like you're in this bar. You're walking into a bar, and it's like this dive bar kind of thing. A bunch of people wearing leather jackets and jeans. I'm picturing like an early 90s, late 80s kind of bar, almost like Roadhouse with Patrick Swayze, like that kind of scene. I'm picturing somebody walking into the bar, and everybody's sitting around, and the protagonist of the story goes up to the bar and orders a drink or something, and then he gets surrounded. They're like a gang comes up behind him, and like one of them sits to his left, one of them sits to his right. There's another guy behind him, and another guy kind of nudges his shoulder and says something like, what are you doing here? Like it's going to be like this kind of thing where the protagonist should not be in this bar. So, and of course the protagonist is a really cool guy, and he doesn't really, kind of shrugs him off, whatever. And then somehow a bar fight breaks out, and I'm picturing like as soon as the bar fight starts, like as soon as somebody grabs that first bottle and smashes it. I smashed my microphone. I'm getting really into this story, guys. So as soon as the first guy picks up the beer bottle and smashes it against the corner of the bar and kind of has the jagged edge of glass, I picture this song starting with the and then a massive bar fight breaks out where chairs are getting thrown, people are getting thrown over bars and through windows and over pool tables, and the whole thing just goes nuts. And then at the end of the song, when it finally ends, you have the protagonist standing victorious over an entire bar filled with people on the floor because he just kicked all their butts. That is the image that comes to mind when I hear this song from Redneck Rampage. This one is one of those things where I remember the song, I love the song, I don't really have any memory so much about the game, but the song itself evokes such a strong, number one, memory, but also just evokes a feeling. It evokes a feeling that almost transcends, or it does actually in this case, transcends the game that it was associated with. Because like I said, I have no deep appreciation or love for Redneck Rampage, but that song is something that transports me to another world. And that really is the magic of music. When you play an interactive experience in a game, the whole point is to become immersed and transport yourself into an alternate reality, to be able to experience something that you could not experience personally. With music, it deepens that level of immersion, and sometimes music can be the cause of that immersion. But even beyond that, it both immerses you, but it can also bring you back to simpler times. It can evoke senses of nostalgia. It can bring back memories. Music is transformative. I love music in general, but I especially love music in video and computer games. I feel like music in games can really set the mood, it can deepen your immersion, and it can also strengthen your own memories of a time where the only thing you needed to worry about was playing a game and getting to the next level. For somebody with a bunch more responsibility today than what I had in the past, that's definitely a level of escapism that I enjoy experiencing. And I will always love and appreciate music for that reason. That was our episode on Sounds of the Classics first-person shooters. I hope you all enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you'd like to reach out, let me know how I'm doing, provide feedback, comments, suggestions, or just talk about classic games and technology in general, I would love to hear from you, and there are a few ways you can reach out. I have an X account with the handle @ClassicGamingT. I have an email address, which is classicgamingtoday@gmail.com, and we have our Discord server. The link is in the show notes. Discord is the best way to get in touch with me and the rest of the community around this podcast. We have a ton of fun out on Discord. I highly encourage you all to check it out. I also highly encourage you to check out our Patreon. It is patreon.com/ClassicGamingToday. If you want even more Classic Gaming Today goodness, including a Patreon exclusive bi-weekly podcast expansion pack, patreon.com/ClassicGamingToday is where it's at. Before we sign off for the week, I do want to mention that our next episode is going to be focused on Police Quest, so feel free to write in if you have any particularly fond or not so fond memories of that experience. At the same time, I recognize you're likely listening to this podcast on any number of podcast services, and if you would feel so inclined, it would be great if you could leave me a review. This is not about trying to bolster star counts. This is not about trying to harvest a ton of 5-star ratings, though if that happens, awesome, it means we're doing something right. No, what it's really all about is trying to deliver the best possible podcast I can. The only way to do that is to get feedback from all of you, the listener community, to make sure I am hitting the mark and delivering the content you all want to listen to. We get new listeners every single day, which is simply amazing. I want to continue to grow this community and continue to make the best possible podcast I can. We'll be back in around a week with our next episode focused on Police Quest. Until then, remember, sometimes the games of the past are just as good, if not better, than the games of today. Goodbye, everyone.